Welcome to the fourth and final episode. Joining Mark Farmer and me in the studio, we are talking about everything in construction. This episode's moving our great industry forwards. Mark, we're going to try and do this in about 10, 12 minutes. So let's go. Looking at your previous two reports, and this is fascinating. I mean, this obviously, one of them very recent, one of them nearly 10 years old. Time to decide the industry's future, urgent need for action, productivity, innovation, etc. And then strategic workforce planning, system-wide transformation, addressing skills shortages. We sit here in 2025. Your reports were very spot on and accurate with strong recommendations. Have we moved forward?
I think we have, but by nowhere near the amount we should have done. So certainly in the context of the recommendations that I make, certainly from Modernise or Die, which is 10 years ago, as you say, we haven't really moved on to the degree that I would have hoped. So,
why is that, though?
Because I think just change is difficult, and it comes back to one of the points I picked up in that review, which is that we need a strategic change initiator, to use a bit of a mouthful of a term, which is like, if you don't inject some reason for changing and leave industry to get on with it by itself, it's glacial. And I think we've seen that. And I think part of the issue is that, industry's busy just doing the day job, and the ability to think strategically, think at high level, and actually see problems coming down the path in front of you is sometimes really difficult. And I get a sense, and I think the economic cycle and some of the things that happens in that intervening period. So we've had the pandemic, and we've had an economic downturn subsequent to that. I think they've both been, certainly the economic downturn, probably more than COVID in the end, have been quite damaging for the sector in terms of the ability to think about change in a positive way, because the idea of modernising, improving things is seen as a risk. It's seen as, the reality is everyone knows the industry's not perfect, far from perfect, but actually it's the devil you know, rather than the devil you don't know that, might make things worse. And the ability to mentally get over that block of saying, look, we need to think about doing things differently because it's a threat to our business, which is really the message I was trying to convey in 2016. And actually my more recent ITB review compounds that, because the biggest threat that's coming down the pipe for the industry collectively is resourcing, and the skills challenge that we have, that we are facing into a capacity problem. If the government wants to use the industry to deliver more homes, build infrastructure, if the private sector wants to invest in commercial assets, with the workforce numbers that we're currently facing into, we've got a problem. And the reality is that it's when that lands in an individual business and someone says, right, that is a threat to my business, that is a threat to the sustainability of me being here in 5 years' time doing what I'm doing, you start to get a reaction. And I think everyone knows we have a problem. I think the most recent downturn has sort of got people thinking, actually, I'll just wait until we're in better times, and then I'll start thinking about what it means. The reality is by then it's probably too late.
Too late.
Because lots of things we should have been doing probably 2 or 3 years ago haven't been done. So we've got a hiatus in thinking about innovation, thinking about improving methods that we use, thinking about process improvement, et cetera, et cetera.
Is that down to leadership? Now, I was at a talk a week ago, and Sarah Jones, the construction minister, stood and spoke. She has no experience in the industry, and I mean zilch. Do we not need people leading? And Kevin Holloway was a big supporter of this, with actual experience in the sector, because the disconnect that we talked about in the previous episode is actually growing.
From a governmental perspective, and I've worked with lots of politicians over the last decade, particularly in the housing space, so housing ministers, and many, there's a revolving door in that job. So I've dealt with a lot of them. It's quite clear you get varying degrees of understanding of our industry. Some people absolutely get it. You don't actually have to have been in the industry. Actually, I find some politicians are just pretty clued up, and they get on top of their brief. They understand the issues very quickly, and they're able to really prioritise policy and thinking. Others basically see the job as sort of a stopgap until they get a promotion, hopefully, into another role. So I've seen a massive variance in the ability of ministers to actually really engage with our industry and take it seriously and understand the issues. To an extent, you would argue that's the job of the likes of Construction Leadership Council in vocalising the issues of the industry and ensuring it speaks collectively as a representative voice of the industry, which is, again, is a separate issue we've spoken about separately. I just think the leadership point, I think you get industry-wide leadership as an issue, which is this sort of sense of how we engage with the likes of government, but there's also business leadership. And I think, what you need to view it on both levels around individual businesses, and I'm not really talking about micro SME businesses here. I'm probably talking about mid to large size businesses that can make a difference and can lead by example. I just think the decision to do something differently, to innovate in what you do in your day-to-day business is a choice. And actually, sometimes it does need strong leadership. It needs the sense that you're going to go first and do something. I think we have a lack of that in our industry. Our industry is naturally conservative, doesn't like change, and actually sees change as a risk. And there is there's a well-known saying that you don't necessarily get change unless the risk of doing the same thing becomes greater than the risk of changing.
I will give you a good example of that. I learned, obviously, a while ago. Still to this day, if you say, right, here's a couple of £1 million, go and build your own house, brick and block, because that's all I've ever done. Yet, obviously, I know from looking at your reports, big fan of MMC and everything, it's probably way better, it's cheaper, it's more cost effective in terms of bringing it, you're not restricted with whether it's being built off-site and brought in. But we don't like change. And I think that's a big problem with moving us forward. There's so many people kind of stuck in your day-to-day that you've done for years. How do we change that? Because old people like me, it's hard work to shift what you believe in.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of points I would make there. I think, firstly, one of the problems the industry faces is the uncertainty of its pipeline. So that goes to the heart of so many of the issues the industry has. So the fact that we're project-based. We go from one project to the next. You're waiting for your next order. You don't have long-term planning ability because of the nature of the sector and the economic environment we trade in. So, and actually, confidence in investment, confidence in changing things comes partly through knowing that you've got steady workload ahead. And actually, you're not going to have, like we've had over the last few years, a big downturn that all of a sudden derails investment. And that's what's happened. Some of the innovators who are coming into the sector in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly in modular housing, where there is a big sort of real focus on trying to change the whole delivery model, have all been, most of them have failed.
Yeah.
And partly down to that conservatism of people didn't want to change, but what was the real killer for them was actually the fact there was a housing downturn. So actually the ability to take a very small slice of a smaller market in the future was the pressure that became too much. So the economic models behind innovation is really important. We have to learn from that last cycle. We can't ignore it. We have to see that actually it didn't work. It didn't work because actually, setting up a factory and doing things and spending lots of money on equipment in an uncertain world where firstly you've got to penetrate the market and then you've got to have a stable market doesn't always come together. My view is that the innovation we're going to see in the industry going forward is going to be much more hybrid. We're going to see a world where traditional construction techniques go hand in hand with off-site techniques. So you're going to see parts of buildings being done in factories and then the balance is going to be done on site. Timber frame is a classic example where that already happens. It has happened for a long time. You're going to see more of that. And I think you're going to see other examples where choices are made as to do we do something on site or do we do it remotely or do we pre-assemble something and then put it into position rather than build it in situ. Because they're the sort of things that when you're looking at how do you reduce labour intensity, how do you take some of the stress off the workforce, it's an easier journey to go on than saying that house there, we're just going to do it all in the factory. Firstly, that supply chain no longer exists, to be honest, but actually the mental block of making that decision is so great that actually it's unlikely it's going to happen anyway. So we're now left in the world where I think we've got more sustainable, deliverable innovation happening. The ultimate thing coming back to change and what drives change will be people thinking, well, I need to do it this way, otherwise I've got a risk that I can't deliver. Either I can't deliver for a price, I can't deliver to a quality, And that's back to labour force, that's back to the resources we have in the industry. So I think we're going to hit some tipping points in the next period of time, which will just drive that journey of innovation in a sustainable, long-term way.
And have to change apprenticeships as well.
Yeah, so
it's all very new, isn't it?
we need, what's really important is that when you innovate, even in the hybrid way, it has implications on existing training. So the ground workers, the bricklayers, the carpenters and joiners, the electricians, plumbers, etc., you're faced with different details on site, different interface details, junctions, technical assemblies that you might not have been trained on in your apprenticeship course. So you have to either be upskilled on the job, which is back to a point I make a lot about upskilling the existing workforce. Can't just concentrate on new workers. We've got to bring everyone up to a level where they're able to operate with changing construction technology. And it will change. We'll see materials innovations.
Yeah.
We'll see new materials coming into construction, all of which might have implications on how people have been trained historically.
And I think just before we go into a couple of viewers' questions, this was my last point. We've got some big positives. It's been a negative few years, but sustainables, renewable energy, speaking with a few industry leaders and the work and money going into that, certainly in Wales and the southwest and Scotland, there's somebody coming into the industry now, setting up in renewables.
Yep.
There's fantastic opportunities, and I'm genuinely excited by where we're going. Now, just a few questions. I didn't throw this out to the world. I just asked a few close sort of business associates. CITB and CLC collaboration, whilst well-intentioned, many within industry view these collaborations as more of the same unless they fundamentally alter how training is designed, funded, and aligned to market need. What do you think about what they're doing on that?
So I would agree with that premise. And actually a lot of that was reflected in the recommendations of my recent ITB review. So
Right.
I very much talked about making sure that training was fit for purpose. It reflected industry need, that the pathways into our industry were reformed. There's a lot to be done around how we restructure apprenticeship courses. There have been some announcements regarding foundation apprenticeships, for instance, where we get sort of short form 9-month apprenticeship courses. I have to say the early feedback on that is not actually positive because there's a concern it's being designed without industry. Back to your point that actually if you're going to do modernisation, if you're going to reform training techniques, it has to be an industry-led approach. So the consultation that's happened with those free construction-related foundation apprenticeship courses, for whatever reason, hasn't necessarily happened, and that's not a good start. So I think for me, the idea of the CLC, CITB coming together to collaborate and to drive change, which again is part of my strategic thinking in the ITB review, the proof is in the pudding. So what are the things that everyone's going to do differently? Because I do fear that sometimes there's sort of a rebrand, and this is where the Construction Skills Mission Board comes back into play. Like you put all the same chess pieces on the table, but in a different way.
Same people in it.
And actually you don't get a different outcome.
Yeah.
You need a change of thinking.
Yeah.
It needs to be quite ruthless in many respects around upsetting the apple cart, having conversations people don't want to have. I don't think there's enough appetite for that, if I'm perfectly honest, in terms of calling a spade a spade. We need to actually be really, really honest with people around what's working and what's not, and be absolutely mission focused, which is what the mission board is supposed to be, but actually not just give it as a title of a quango or a working group. Actually prove you're making an impact on those missions.
How accountable are they going to be? Because 600 odd million is a lot of money. Spoke to a few people involved. You can only be on it if you're a CEO of a big company, which maybe got my back up a little bit. Familiar names on it. Are they going to be accountable? Because in X years, 4 years, this huge number of people they're bringing in, what happens if they don't?
Well, the simple answer is they should be.
Yeah.
Because actually, and it goes back to the Construction Leadership Council and it's not just CLC, there's other bodies out there trying to drive change in the industry. And, the reality is you should be measured by results. In private business, you're measured by results. You either make a profit or you don't. You say what you're going to do as part of your business plan. Your business plan is what you measure yourself by. And that thinking needs to be injected into the world, certainly of construction skills and outcomes related to the industry. There's too much at stake for this to be like, let's just have a load of hot air and talk about stuff. And I'm not suggesting that's the case. That would be wrong. But there is a danger that you have these sort of gatherings and comings together of senior people, and there's a lot of of talk about and some of it is absolutely on the money, some of it won't be. But actually, for me, it's about what happens next. So what's come out of that meeting that's going to drive the outcome that the guys and girls on site feel, or the kids that want to come in the industry feel. That's the bit I'm cynical about, because I'm not sure there's anything that I've heard, certainly, and I'm sort of in the midst of sort of various discussions. There's nothing that's absolutely fresh thinking that I think is a game changer at the moment. I just see various bits of we'll put a focus on this, put a focus on that, and I'm not convinced it's going to make the difference. Certainly, I've got a real doubt as to whether we can deliver 100,000 additional recruits. Not only can't we measure the start point, going back to data, but secondly, the ability to get another 100,000 people per annum, which is the mission, through the gatherings that we're talking about in terms of leadership forums, etc. What is it that's going to drive that number?
Do you know the most ironic thing about this is, flip the industry on its head, us lot on the ground grafting, put a foot wrong, you're out the door without pay. Whereas you go to the top with this huge sum of money to bring people in, which we both agree is brilliant, but if it's not done properly, the head's going to roll.
Yeah, I think with politicians, obviously, they will fall on results, in the sense they won't get re-elected potentially if some of these things don't happen. I think in things like skills and training, it won't necessarily be to top of the electorate's thinking. It's not going to be the reason that this current government doesn't.
I was thinking about the mission board. There's some big names on there that you would hope would know how to move it forward. But again, is it looking after him and her on the ground that?
And I think that's the bit where, going back to the representation of the mission board, the SME voice has to be there. Has to be, however that it manifests, it has to be driven into the thinking. And I'm not, it would be doing the representatives on that mission board a disservice to say that they'd be completely blind to what's going on. They will all have a view based on their own businesses and how they interact in the overall stakeholder map as to what the issues are on construction sites. But there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth in terms of the real people that you're trying to influence. Should be, in my view, right at the heart of that discussion. Not actually, and this is by the way what we're going to do to you. This is going to be applied to you, without being properly consulted in that process.
We have other questions, but we are running out of time. I'm going to give you one final one. Mark, I really appreciate you coming in. You're given the crown. You're in charge of the industry. What are 3 things you'll put in place tomorrow morning to actually move us forward?
Wow. So I think one of the sort of guiding principles that I've spoken about a lot is pipeline. So there's been a lot of talk about pipeline recently. So we've had the new infrastructure pipeline published. We've had a new affordable homes programme talked about and funded, £40 billion worth of affordable housing over 10 years. So one of the first things I'd do is get really mobilised around the idea of showing the pipeline to the industry, because I think it's a big enabler of confidence building. So how do you show the jobs that are coming up from government, but ideally from the private sector as well? And this is quite a complex challenge, and it goes back to one of my observations in the recent ITB review about strategic workforce planning. So much of the damage that's been done to our industry is about boom and bust. It's about cyclicality. De-risk the industry by showing the industry what's coming, both public and private workload. Second thing I'd probably do is think about the pathways into industry for young kids. I don't think it's working at the moment in the way it should, particularly around the sort of traditional apprenticeship pathways. I think we need to think about different entry pathways which make kids productive earlier. So there's a really interesting bit of feedback I've had from certainly the house building sector that the traditional apprenticeship pathways, the kids are being held back around their ability to actually get on site and do productive work rather than just be a labourer or whatever. So I think there's something around how we restructure those apprenticeship pathways and think about traineeships, not just about apprenticeships. make sure we resolve this issue about foundation apprenticeships that I spoke about. I'm not sure that's going in the right direction. We need to capture that early, and think differently about that. And thirdly, I suppose there's a bigger picture point here about the image issue that we spoke about earlier. What are the things that are going to make construction aspirational for young kids? Not a career of last resort, not a sort of dumping ground, but actually get kids thinking about our industry differently. So there's a whole piece around the interventions or the communication channels with young kids that we need a mass overhaul on. Again, it's one of my observations in the ITB review is that actually industry should own that. At the moment, CITB are putting money into Go Construct and stuff like that. We need a mass overhaul. Something different needs to happen if we're gonna change the game around attraction to kids and to kids that are really motivated to be in the industry, want to do good work and be part of our future.
Do you know, when I was doing the extensions, there was no better feeling. You walk into a house to price a job and you think, oh dear, this is grim. Not been touched in decades. You go in, rip it to pieces, extend, and you leave it show home. And as you literally close the door, you think, I've done that.
Yeah. And
no better feeling. Or if you've designed it or priced it, all these different things, there's such an amazing feeling. And you've done that with your hands. And I think we need to inspire those kids to go, I want to do that.
Because that actually is the unlock for so many of the other issues that we've talked about, including mental health, actually. So if we get a high-performing industry with everyone in it wanting to do the right thing, actually being policed in the right way around, poor behaviours being excluded from the industry and promoting good best practice and the sense of pride and work ethic that we've been talking about there, you'll solve a lot of other issues as well in our industry.
Mark, thank you.
Appreciate
your time and coming in. Wow, a fascinating 4-part series of The Opinion Piece, and we're going to be back very soon with another guest.